Welcome to Leadership Lessons, a time when we get to have a conversation with another leader, usually a Kentucky Baptist leader, and learn from his ministry and leadership story. My name is Todd Gray with Kentucky Baptist Convention. My guest today is Dr. Virgil Grant, who is pastor of East Side Community Church in Richmond, Kentucky. Dr. Grant's longtime Kentucky Baptist, a friend to me personally, an outstanding leader. The Lord has used him, and you'll appreciate our conversation together. If you're joining us online, please feel free to add your comments, anything that you'd like to share. Virgil, thanks for taking the time to join me on Leadership Lessons.
Well, Todd, thank you for having me, and I consider it an honor and a privilege to spend a few moments dialoguing with you about ministry, what God's doing in and through the local church.
You and I, our paths have crossed for years. I remember coming to a training back at here in the Baptist building years ago that you were leading. You did some stuff with NAM and Next Steps Leadership. So you've been at this thing for a good while. Take a minute, introduce yourself, and tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, I'd be glad to do that. Well, Todd, as you said, I'm Virgil Grant. I have a wife for 34 years now, Rosemary. She's a retired special ed school teacher. She put in 29 years and retired. And now she is taking care of her granddaughter, who's 6 months old, Ruby Rose. And we have two children, Jacob, who's 31, and Rachel, who's 27. Both of them are married, and they're actively involved in the community here in Richmond and in our church.
Yeah,
and so I've been at East Side for starting my 32nd year next month. Went to Cumberland College, now the University of Cumberland's. Graduated from Southern Seminary with a Master of Divinity, and then went on to get my doctorate at Columbia International University down in Columbia, South Carolina. And so that's a little bit about my background.
Virgil, tell us something about yourself or your ministry that not many people know.
Well, not many people knows that my dad and mom planted Eastside. They were a part of a church that was dying. They didn't want children. They did not want to change. My parents had a heart for young people, and they started a church in their basement. They did not know what they were doing. They invited some friends over. There's like 18 people that was met in their basement. They decided to launch a church, call a pastor. It fell apart within the first year. The pastor wasn't really a church planner. He was more of a established church pastor. And the church floundered for about 5 years before they constituted as a church. And so my mom and dad started the church, and not many people knows that. And my father just passed away a couple months ago, and he was super proud of the progress that Eastside had made, because he was always investing in the young people and young families in our community. And he was just super thrilled with the ministry and the impact that Eastside was and is having here in this region.
I didn't know that story until you shared it with me recently over lunch, and a great story for your dad to get to watch that church grow from that first group of 18 people, almost died, and then came to life. It's just been a great church. Virgil, how did the call of Christian ministry leadership come to you? When did you realize that the Lord was calling you to a vocation in ministry?
Yeah, well, I was 16. I was involved in the work of the church that my mom and dad had planted. It was a mission church. We hadn't even been incorporated or joined the Kentucky Baptist Convention at that point. We were just operating, and we were out knocking on doors with a couple other lay people. And we did that 3 or 4 nights a week for forever, it felt like. But for about a year and a half, we just faithfully knocked on doors. And out of that just involvement, being invited into ministry and being exposed to what God was doing in people's lives, that came the call. And then I started talking to a couple different pastors in the community. Some of them, like Fred Livingood, who was a long-term pastor here in our county, and they just gave me wisdom and helped me to do next steps. And they said, hey, if you're going to go in ministry, you need to go to college and get a degree. And so that's how it came about, is just actually being invited into the local church ministry, because that's how we all start.
Yep.
Is through that first initial invitation to serve in the church.
Everything comes out of the local church. So, Brother Fred and others who were helpful to you, you mentioned one thing that Pastor Fred suggested was that you go to college and eventually on to seminary. Any other advice, Virgil, that you remember early on that came from when you were just fresh answering the call and others were speaking into your life?
Yeah, well, I kind of got the opposite end of the spectrum. They said, it's God's call if you can't do anything else.
Yeah.
Like, if you try to, do something else with your life, and if you can't do that, then it's God's call. And I tried that method of trying a couple different things, and all of it pointed back to the calling.
Well, you've had a great ministry, and I'm grateful for Fred and others. So KBC is working on an initiative. It'll be introduced at our fall meeting in November, referenced as Calling Out the Called. The reason behind that initiative is because there seems to be a empty pipeline in Kentucky, especially for bivocational pastors. I don't know if you noticed that. Do you see that where you are? We see there seem to be few men available to go and pastor some very small churches, mid-size up 120 people or more. They can find pastors, but small bivocational led churches are having a hard time. Do you see that or recognize it at all?
I know that's always been a problem.
Yeah.
My assumption was that it was still a problem, because 60% of our churches in KBC or in the world probably is bivocational.
At least we did some research, Virgil, a couple of years ago, and we narrowly defined a bivocational pastor. So we didn't really include the retired person who had a retirement income. We didn't really include seminary students who are pastoring. We just focused on people with a second job and also pastoring a church, and found it's at least 60% of our churches are led by men in that category.
Yeah. And so what we've done at Eastside is I have 7 staff members currently underneath the age of 30.
Wow.
And we're getting ready to hire 2 residents that are 20. They're in college, but they feel a calling to go into full-time ministry. And so as they finish up college, they're going to do 2 years of residency here at our church. And then when they graduate in 2 years, they'll actually have a 4-year college degree and 2 years of a ministry experience at a church, of a large church. And so we are working on raising up those in our church. And the more younger people that we get, the more the younger people can see themselves serving in the local church. And so a couple years ago, when I took a chance on some couple 24-year-olds, that was a game changer, because that allowed other young people to see that they could be and do ministry in the local church. And so I'm super excited about this next generation. And we even have some kids now that in their youth program that's 14 and 15 is already feeling the call. And so just having the young staff helps the younger generation to see that they can actually serve in the local church.
Virgil, have you seen folks answer the call and then leave your place of ministry? Nobody wants to leave a good church, but if God's calling you, it might not be to stay serving at Eastside. So have you seen folks answer the call at Eastside and that are now out serving somewhere in ministry?
Not yet,
Okay.
Todd, because this all the people on staff have come from out of our church.
Okay.
And so, except me, and of course, I guess I left and came back, but everyone has come up within our church. And so because it's 6 or 7 years of age, we haven't had the tenure to see those people leave and go somewhere else because we're still in the infancy stage.
Well, these residents that you're working with, I assume the hope is that they're going to go out somewhere else and lead in a place of ministry or serve on staff somewhere.
Well, yeah, the goal is, is to, at the end of the 2 years, is for them to be ready to come on staff. They actually become the pipeline that you talked about earlier for local church.
Well, tell us a little bit about Eastside. You've referenced it was a church plant. And so kind of tell us where it is now in size, anything that we ought to know about the church that you currently serve.
Yeah. So Eastside, our whole model is based upon spiritual conversations and helping people to take their next spiritual step. And we use the term shepherd. We make sure that everyone in our church has either a temporary shepherd or a permanent shepherd that is helping that individual to take their next spiritual steps. Because, what I discovered when I was young in the church, that I didn't have anybody really intentionally investing in me unless I went and asked for it. And, and I didn't really know the next step to take. And so we have taken that and we have put everyone in our church. We actively, we have about 10,000 people in our database, but we have about 2,200 people that's actively in our database. And our goal is to have all of them under a shepherd, whether a temporary shepherd or a permanent shepherd at Eastside, and help them to take their next spiritual step and give them direction. And we look at it from an organizational standpoint, is that we have to create the environments so that we can get them into so that God can move in their lives. So worship environment, life group, serving, and generosity. And if we can help people to get into all of those environments, then God can do different things in each of those environments.
Virgil, what's the difference between a temporary shepherd and I understand one's temporary, one's permanent, but why those two distinctions?
Yeah, because, so for example, we have 135 people that since January has been, we've had more than that. We have 135 people currently that's in the first through fourth process. They've made their first visit, but they haven't made it to their fourth visit. And so those people who greeted and met them at the door got their name, got their cell number, and that person, that member who met them, becomes their temporary shepherd. Yeah. And that temporary shepherd's goal is to get that individual or that family or couple to a life group. And then that life group leader becomes the permanent shepherd. Wow. Because now they're in community.
So if I show up at Eastside, someone's going to take responsibility of me until I'm either more engaged in a life group or I'm just completely gone. And is that kind of what you're describing?
Yeah. And we will only count you if we met you, got your name, and got your cell number. And so if you slipped in and entered into worship and no one met you or greeted you or identified you as a first-time guest or second or third, whatever, then we wouldn't even count that in our data. And so we've had people show up and then, they come from another community, they're a seasoned saint, and they show up and go, yep, I want into a life group. And so they attend worship and we get them in a life group because of that new guest team that is greeting every single person who walks through the doors.
So you're making sure that no person at Eastside is left unattended. Someone's looking out for their spiritual well-being if they're at that church.
Yeah, and because I grew up in a church that, and I'm not being critical, it's just a different time, correct? Yeah. Is that they gave all the announcements, and there was 15 announcements, and you didn't know which way to go.
Yeah.
Because there's too many choices. And so we do like one announcement is all that we do on the weekends to help people to know what we think is important. And then we're always pointing people from worship to life group.
So it sounds like everything at Eastside is very intentional about taking the next step and leading people deeper in their relationship with the Lord and in their service to Christ. Is that fair?
Yeah. And, and we count success as a church. There's only one measurement of success, and that is for someone living a fully surrendered life, or what we call is an all-in life. Yeah. So, you can get baptized, and that's a victory. You can join a life group. That's fantastic. You can start giving, but we count not members. We count people who's living the fully surrendered all-in life for Jesus. And we as an organization, as a church, we have to define that. Yeah. Because if we leave it to the individuals, then you got people who has false humility, and then you got people who has no emotional intelligence. Yeah. So you get them on both ends. And so we early on, as we was on this journey, we realized we couldn't leave it with the individual. We had to take organizational responsibility. So we would say that you're all in if you're attending worship, if you're in a life group, if you're serving, and if you are on the generosity journey. And if you do those four things, we as an organization, now you as an individual may not agree that you're an all-in, but as an organization and church staff, we have to have a way of metrics and measurement, and that's how we measure people living an all-in life for Jesus, because we got them in the environments where God can actually do something through those environments in the lives of those individuals. And God is always responsible for the results, not us.
Virgil, the language you're using obviously is very intentional, and it's probably come out of years of trial and error. But the pushback that someone might give is that you're creating a different level of spirituality. Some are more spiritual. That's not at all what you're doing. You just said it right there. So Donald Whitney, in his book about spiritual disciplines, he says the spiritual disciplines don't produce godliness, but the spiritual disciplines get you on the workbench where God can do his work in your life. And so prayer and Bible study and scripture memory, all those get me to a place where God can do his work in me. That's what you're describing. If I hear you right, is that correct?
Yeah. And so the life group leader, what's the life group leader's job? Is two things. One, help the members to read the Bible, to pray, and listen to the Holy Spirit. And the second thing is to help the life group members then to start serving. Because what we know, if people are not connected into community and they go directly from worship to serving, and what happens is they just feel abused and misused. True. Because there's no voice of counterbalance in their life who says, you matter to God, you belong, you should be serving as part of the Acts 2 model of the first church. And so when people goes from worship straight into serving, then we have to reverse shepherd them back to life groups.
Well, those are great discoveries. My guess is that you've learned some of them the hard way, that you've just watched people burn out and flame out and realize if they're not connected to a group of people, they're not going to last long and serve well. Hey, I want to go back to something you said and take 1 minute. So the early years of your church, you all were out knocking on doors 3 or 4 nights a week. There's still a lot of folks that do that. It's a good way of introducing and meeting people. And I'm not asking whether or not your church still does it. But back at that time, what did you discover from that experience of just going up to people's homes, knocking on their door, and either inviting them to a church or trying to share? What do you remember from that time?
The thing that I remembered is that people were open to having spiritual conversations.
Yeah.
And it's the same as true today.
It's still true. It's still true, Virgil. And, it's an old school approach and no method. it's not about methods, it's about faithfulness to Christ. But when I go out and knock on doors, I discover folks are far more open to standing on their front porch and having a conversation. Well, I appreciate you mentioning that, and appreciate the history of your church. So tell us a little bit about your routine as a pastor. Every pastor's different, and you've been at the East Side for 32 years. So what does an average day or average week look like? What do you do on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday?
It's different.
Yeah.
I do not have a standard weekly schedule. The only thing that's standard is probably Sunday mornings.
Okay.
I get up at 6. I arrive at the church at 7. From 8 to 9, we have anywhere from 9 to 20 guys that shows up, and we have an hour prayer time, and we just pray for the solid hour. So I have a couple guys that invites men to come, and they do all the logistics, and we just pray from 8 to 9 o'clock. Then I have a flow meeting with the worship team, and then we have 9:30 and 11 worship times, and then I'm usually gone by 1, and then we have a life group at our home on Sunday evenings. That's the only day that's fixed, because as you know, I'm a consultant, and I do a lot of strategic planning, and I do a lot of leadership development and team building for other organizations. So when you add that into the mix, it's never standardized my week because of those.
Do you function best, Virgil, with less structure and more openness? Is that just kind of the way you're wired?
Yes, I love structure with my time with God.
Yeah.
I want that to be very structured. Outside of that, I'm very, very flexible.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. That's good. It's good to learn about different folks. What's going on the East Side right now that you're most excited about?
Well, the thing that I'm most excited about is that we are really, really focusing in on our student ministry. We've started a Sunday night worship service for our 6th grade through college, and we are really putting a lot of energy behind that for them to have their own worship service. And since we started back up in August, middle of August, we've been having over 100 kids show up for that. It's all led by students, except the message, and the message is done by our high school, middle school, or college pastor, one of them. And so in Labor Day weekend, we have what we call student takeover on Sunday mornings, and the students takes over everything. They take over hospitality, parking, ushering. They have the worship team. We'll have 4 speakers that they'll be given 7 minutes each on the same passage.
Wow.
They will speak, and they will actually do the message. They do the announcements. They do everything. Last year during COVID, that was the highest attendance Sunday that we had on Labor Day weekend, outside of another special event with Daryl Strawberry. But the students takes over the whole service that weekend, and we call it student takeover.
I bet that was your dad's favorite service.
It was. I mean, he loved it. And because, here's the thing about it is that the all-in people, they love anything that we do.
Yeah.
Because they're for us. But he loved it. He didn't miss it.
Wow. And so, I mean, those students are getting it. I mean, 7 minutes, on the platform to preach to several hundred people for a high school student, or to speak or tell your story. That's an incredible experience. And I can see where the Lord could use that to really propel some people forward into ministry. What's currently most challenging at Eastside, Virgil? What are you facing now that's more difficult than other things?
Yeah. And I think the thing is just culture itself, because, it seems like, I don't know for you guys, but there's no rhythm. to life anymore. Life seems extremely heavy wherever you turn. And it's not just personal with COVID and being, in quarantine, but there's sickness and illness. There's different mandates from the government, and I'm not trying to be political.
Sure.
There's different mandates, and then you take what's taking place at the border in the U.S. We just had a member to tell me that he's going to be deployed to El Paso, Texas for a year, leading 3,500 National Guard troops to protect the border because they're coming in so quickly. And all that chaos is there's a lot of violence. Then you got Haiti, and then you've got the chaos in Afghanistan. And you just add all that up, and it just seems like that people are overwhelmed. And we have a lot of teachers. We probably have 60 people in our church that are either a school teacher or they're in administration. We have probably that many in healthcare.
Wow.
And then we probably have 20 officers, police officers. So you just take all that and put that together. It's the culture thing of how do we, remind people that, there's a spiritual battle. This politics is not the answer. The world thinks politics is the answer, but it's a spiritual battle, and it all lies in God's hands. And to remind them of that and not to grow weary and continue to be the light of Christ in the midst of turmoil, chaos, trials, and tribulations. And I keep reminding them that, your walk with Christ can be great, but it does not mean that there's no issues, because Christ said what? In this world.
Yeah. You will have tribulation.
Troubles.
You're going to have trouble.
All kinds of troubles.
And that
but he
trouble
doesn't end there. He says, but I've overcome the world. And so so people think because they have a great relationship with Christ that they shouldn't have any trials or tribulations. And I'm like, that's not true. Is that these trials and tribulations proves to you that Jesus is truth, because his words are coming true. We're actually experiencing all of this. And so that whole culture piece, I don't know how to articulate it any better than just done. I don't know. It's just so heavy, and people are just, they're exhausted, and I don't know if it's information fatigue. I don't know if it's compassion fatigue. I think there's a couple of different ways that you could label it, but there's some type of fatigue that's going on in the culture, and I don't know exactly how to articulate that.
Well, thanks for describing it, because you're describing the folks that are coming to the worship gathering on Sunday morning. They're bringing all that with them, and it's what they've been dealing with all week long. And so for you as a pastor, you're interacting with it. You're absorbing a lot of it. You're hearing folks respond in ways that they may not have 2 years ago. You're seeing things come out in people that you wouldn't have seen. So my guess is that your daily time with the Lord is a place where you process some of that and you get your own self back on track. Tell us about your daily quiet time. What's your structure for your meeting time with the Lord? What do you do?
Yeah. So I do 4 things almost every morning. The first thing I do is I read a chapter in a book, and I do that first just to wake up,
okay.
And just kind of come alive as I'm drinking my first cup of coffee. And right now I'm reading Pastor by Eugene Peterson.
Okay.
It's an older book. I have never read it. And I read his authorized biography and fell in love with his story. And so I read a chapter in a book every morning. The second thing I do is I read through the Bible every year. And so I'm doing that through the Bible app, YouVersion. And then the third thing I do is I spend 15 minutes in contemplative prayer practice. And that is from St. Ignatius, where you really don't think about anything. You don't talk to God. You really just be still. And, talking about the work, putting yourself on the workbench, is that you're letting God just do the work in you. And when your mind drifts, then I just use the word Jesus to come back to center.
Uh-huh.
And then it's almost like it's a daily Sabbath for 15
Yep.
minutes
Yep.
where you just trusting that God is doing that deep-seated work that I don't have to drive, that I don't have to be in charge of. But I just do that for 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last 15 minutes is a journal.
Okay. On the contemplative prayer time, is that any different than solitude, the discipline of solitude? And if so, how is it different?
Yeah, I don't know if there's any difference or not. I'm not an expert. I've started. I have a spiritual director in my life.
Yeah.
We meet once a month on the phone, and he lives in Colorado, and he just helps me to pursue Jesus, and he helps me to pay attention to what Jesus is doing in me and through me. And so he introduced this to me 6 or 7 months ago, and I've just really honed in on it in the last couple months, adding it to my.
Are there times, those four things, are there times when you have to refresh those four things that your time becomes routine or stale and that you have to shift something around a little bit? Or has this just been a consistent practice for a long time?
No, so I used to just do the Bible reading and then journaling. And so over the last couple of years, I've added these other two things, the reading, and then the fourth one is the contemplative prayer practice. Is just something I've added in the last couple of months.
Well, thanks for sharing that. I love hearing the practice. So you mentioned this spiritual director as a person who's helped you grow recently. How did you discover this person? How did you find him?
Well, through the Patterson Center, where I do the consulting work, and he's one of the consultants. We call them guides because we guide people through a process.
Right.
And we was up there for a refresher training for the process. And I met him through that and just fell in love with his spirit, his heart, and got talking to him. And I said, hey, would you be willing to be my spiritual director? And he goes, yes, I'd love to do it. And we had a phone conference call. And so this is his second year. He's younger than I am. I'm 55. He's probably 36, 37, but he has a Master of Divinity and spiritual practice or spiritual discipline. So he's very highly qualified.
Well, I'm glad you have someone like that helps you. So, Virgil, cynicism is something that happens in ministry sometime when there are constant disappointments or pastors, leaders feel let down by people, things that were expected that didn't happen. How do you stay fresh and hopeful? And 32 years in one church, how have you fought against cynicism?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it's different based on your personality and your perspective of life and even your perspective of leadership.
Yeah.
Because everybody looks at leadership differently. But I think you have to make some decisions in your heart to keep a soft heart. And I think the first one is, I'm going to choose joy over judgment. I think we have a choice in that issue. And so I just look for joy rather than for the judging other people, being condemning. Because I grew up with condemnation and judgment and don't want anything to do with that in the church I grew up in. And then, I think you have to choose grace over guilt. There's so many times that, we can look at things and we can feel guilty. And, you go to the third world country, especially, there's all kinds of emotions that are evoked by seeing people living off of $1 a day, and so we just have to make the choice that, hey, I want to choose grace over guilt. And so I think there's just some decisions that you have to make in order to remain soft and have a soft heart, because cynicism is the belief that nothing's going to change.
Yeah.
that you stand up and you preach, and God's not going to move.
Mm-hmm.
And then that leads to a hard heart.
Yeah.
And nobody wants a hard heart. At least I don't.
No.
I want to remain, my heart remains soft in the hands of God. And I believe that God is at work. And I think the greatest miracle that we witness today in the local church, but we don't recognize, is when a first-time guest walk into our church. The amount of they had to overcome in order to come to church is unbelievable. The negative self-talk, the belief that they're not going to be accepted, that the roof is going to fall in if they walk in, they don't have the right clothing, they're going to be judged.
Yep.
And then they can't find their children's shoes or whatever.
That's right.
And to overcome all of that and to come to church, I think is one of the greatest miracles and gifts that we have. And I think we overlook that sometimes. We take it for granted.
Virgil, that's huge. And I know that comes out of you to your guest team, your welcoming team, that they have that same mindset. So when they see a first-time guest, they're like, man, I am witnessing something here that took a lot for this person to walk in this building. That's a game changer. So along being a pastor, you are a consultant. And so what are some traits of a good consultant?
Yeah, well, and I think there's a couple. I think being able to listen is the biggest thing, and then being able to ask good questions. We call ourselves guides because consultants comes in and they give answers.
Right.
We're guides who brings a process. We're the expert in the process, and the client or the customer or the organization that we're working with is the content expert. So we provide a process that helps people to unearth and to get clarity and on their vision and how to move forward. And so we don't pretend to have the answers. We believe that the answer is in the room, truth is in the room, and it's our responsibility to listen, to ask questions. And then when we discover those aha moments where God shows up, that we take some time and unearth and ask questions. Why is this an aha moment for the organization, for the team, and then leverage that to its fullest extent?
Those are good traits for those spiritual conversations that you described early on with your part-time or permanent or temporary shepherds. Good listening skills and asking good questions. Virgil, there was recently a tragedy in your town, Richmond, family that was close to you and close to your church. Can you tell us a little bit about that, what happened, and then how you led your church through that difficult time?
Yeah. So we had a couple, Chris and Gracie Hager, that went to apartment building that they own. It's a duplex. And I don't know if they were looking for rent or if they was going to evict the person or if they just recently bought it, I think. And I don't know if they was introducing themselves. I mean, we don't have all the details, but there was something of that nature. And then as Chris was going up to the apartment, the gentleman came out and shot him. And then from my understanding, that he turned and shot Gracie, Chris's wife, who was in the truck, shot her a couple of times, and then turned and then shot Chris again.
Wow. And
then barricaded himself in that duplex. Of course, all the EMS and everybody shows up, and they have a standoff for a couple hours, and then he sets the duplex on fire before the tear gas came in, and he came out. And so that gentleman is incarcerated currently and is waiting to face trial. I don't know the status of that yet because I've been gone, but that's what happened. And so that happened on a Tuesday afternoon. And we'd had a couple other tragedies in the community. Some prominent people lose a son, age of 23. Another prominent family lost a son in his 40s. So it was just a lot of things converged together. And so what we did is we just said, hey, we're having a community-wide prayer meeting on the next evening on a Wednesday. And then we brought all those families together, invited them to come. They came, we prayed over them, shared some memories of those families,
Wow.
and had a time of worship. And at the end, I gave the plan of salvation and just invited people to come to know Christ if they didn't know him. And then later on that week was the celebration of life service for the Hagers. And then they went back to Eastern Kentucky, where they're from, to have their service, their final service in the resting.
Virgil, your response to that tragedy fits the name of the church. You're Eastside Community Church. You are a community congregation. You're serving the people who are members, but you're also serving the broader community. So thank you for your leadership there, and sorry for your personal loss. I realize his family was also close to you. So the church you pastor is a church plant, and you kind of grew up watching it happen. It almost faltered, and then you've been there 32 years. What's your best advice to someone who wants to plant a church?
Do not do it by yourself.
Yeah.
Have a team approach. And, that is, I came in at Eastside, even though it was still really a church plant, and I was by myself. And it's difficult to do ministry by yourself.
Yeah.
And, ministry now is so much more enjoyable, with 12 staff members and being able to do life together and be a family. And so if I could go back and do it over again, I would launch with a team of staff members and leaders.
Just getting some folks around you who are kind of all in, like you. In fact, you'd probably even use your all in approach and develop those people, and that would be your launch team. Virgil, you've mentioned even on here that your father was a great influence in your life. He recently passed. And what are a couple of life lessons that you saw your father live out that have also stuck with you?
Yeah. So my dad was the youngest child of 13. And so when he was growing up, it was about surviving.
Yeah.
And he went to sixth grade. My dad, he had a very elementary level of reading and writing, but he was always a learner, and he learned by getting himself around really intelligent people and then asking them questions and picking their brains. And so even some of the financial decisions that my dad made throughout life was he leaned on other people that was financially successful. And so he was a constant learner. He just didn't learn by reading a book or reading a blog post or whatever. He learned by talking to people who were successful and learning from them. So that's where my learning comes from. It's from him. I'm always reading, I'm always learning, always developing. And that's the reason why I've been able to stay here for 32 years, because I've been a constant learner. And that comes from my dad. The other thing is my dad was very generous. Even though he grew up very poor, my dad became very successful, but he did let money change him. And he was very generous, supported everything and anything. He loved his community, and he always gave back because he knew that the community was a huge part of his success. So he was always giving back. And the third thing that my dad taught me was never to burn a bridge, because you never knew when you was going to need that bridge again. And so even people who did him wrong, beat him out of money or broke a contract or whatever, he never said anything bad about them. He never burnt that bridge. He always left that bridge in place. And he always encouraged us to do the exact same thing in life. don't burn that bridge, don't burn that bridge. And so that's ingrained in us as well.
Well, it's such great counsel. And Virgil, to get to have a living model of a good example in any area it's invaluable. And I'm grateful for your dad's influence on your life. Can you describe a time in ministry at Eastside, 32 years, where the church had kind of plateaued and it felt a little flat? And if so, has that happened? And then what did you do to address it?
Yeah. So that's a great question. In 2012, we was running 250. We had a budget about $250,000. We'd been at 250 for 10 years.
Wow.
And so we'd peak and come back down, but overall it was a 250 number. And so one of the things that we did is that we have an outside coach that comes monthly to Eastside, and he's become one of my best friends through this process. And because an outside perspective is worth 50 IQ points. It's the outside perspective, because we get emotionally attached to people, we get emotionally attached to concepts and ideals, and so our coach that's been coming in, this is 10 years. He's come in every month, and because I don't know all the answers, I'm not as strategic minded as he is, and he works with 4 or 5 other churches. So we're getting the wisdom of his learnings from other churches and bringing it to Eastside, and what he learns at Eastside, he's taking to the other churches. And so, to think that, we can do it on our own when God has gifted individuals who can help us in the process and get wisdom from them rather than learning wisdom from the University of Hard Knocks.
Yep. So church was at 250, plateaued for 10 years. You had some ups and downs. It wasn't an exact 250 straight line. Where today, that was 2012. Where are you today in worship attendance in 2021?
Yeah. So so right now we're at 750. Pre-COVID it was 929. We have a budget of 1.7, and we had 3 or 4 staff members. We have 12 now.
Yeah.
And so the growth has been unbelievable. We have 2,200 people that we're actively shepherding, and so all of that has been the result of having someone who had a little bit broader picture. He worked for Willow Creek for 16 years, and he came out of that background. And his last duty at Willow Creek was to help them to get into their new worship center some years ago, the new 7,200 seat auditorium. He led that entire project on behalf of Willow. So he comes with a great background, and it's just been helpful. And he's invested in us. We've invested in him and helped him and his family on the journey. So it's been mutually beneficial.
So you addressed your plateau by getting outside counsel over a period of time. And the great thing about that extended relationship is that if the things he shares with you aren't working, he still has to come back next month. Yeah. And you're like, hey, man, you told us to do this, and we did it. So I love the extended relationship part of it. Virgil, growing churches have growing leaders. You are a growing leader. What's something you've done in the past 12 months to invest in your own professional ministry development?
Yeah, and that's a great question. So I've spent a lot of time on the Enneagram. I don't know if the Enneagram is a cuss word in Baptist life or
with
some
KBC,
people, or
with some folks it is, sure.
Yeah, and so I've done a deep dive. I've done an online class. I've went to a 2-day workshop with Ian Morgan Crone. I've been teaching the Enneagram. I've been using it along with conflict resolution and DISC in premarital counseling. And so anyway, I get attached to something. I do a deep dive until I get bored, and then I go find something else and do a deep dive with that. And so that's been so I have a bunch of certifications.
All right.
In different instruments.
What have you learned from the Enneagram that impacts hiring? I didn't prepare you for that question.
No, no, you're fine.
You mentioned conflict and that it impacts conflict. So the Enneagram just kind of shows the way you see the world and kind of how you go at things, your personality, makeup, etc. Do you hire people like yourself, or do you hire people different than yourself?
Everything is, everything's based on talent, right? And gifts and strengths. One thing that I learned a long time, Todd, is that I have a ton of weaknesses. Mm-hmm. So I hire people to complement my weaknesses. And that's the reason why I have multiple coaches, because, one of my fundamental beliefs is that I have to become the best version of me. Mm-hmm. And if I'm going to lead others, I have to become the best version of me. And I need a spiritual director. I have a health coach. Then we have a church coach that comes in, because I don't know it all. And one of the things that I encounter with so many leaders is that they give the aroma, they give the scent that they know it all. Yeah. And I don't know it all. It's too much information. I can't know it all. And so for me, the Enneagram helps me to understand the person that we're hiring better and know what that individual's gifts and strengths and motivations are.
Yeah, that's helpful. So Virgil, without revealing anything too personal, can you describe a hiring situation that didn't go as you hoped it would, and what did you learn from it?
Which one do you want to pick?
I love it.
Yeah, early on, back 26, 27 years ago, I had a couple of staff members, and they were the brunt of the highly dysfunctional Virgil. And if you talk to them and say, hey, what kind of leader is Virgil? That's what they remember.
I hope there's no podcast coming from the early days of Virgil grad. Yeah. I hope we want to hear that through Christianity Today at some point.
Yeah. So, but then, and so they would, and so I tell my staff today, you're the beneficiary of some of those earlier staff members.
So you're the problem, not them.
Yeah. And so, so I had probably the latest one was I take chances on young people. And we just had a guy that was highly talented. We took a chance and we just overwhelmed him too soon and probably derailed the process a little bit faster for him. We should have held back in doing that. And so he ends up, resigning because it's just, he's never been on church staff, coming to a church staff of 1,000 roughly, and it's just overwhelming. And I didn't do a good job monitoring, how we acclimated him to the process.
Yeah, that's so helpful and good to learn from it, and hopefully he'll kind of reflect on it and have better experience next time. Hey, Virgil, you mentioned a couple of numbers. Numbers do not tell the whole story, but they do tell a story. What numbers do you pay attention to as pastor at Eastside?
We pay attention to all in, because we know that if somebody's attending worship only, that their activity engagement will equal just this much. And if we can get them into a life group, then their commitment, engagement, each step they take, the engagement. So for example, we've done the research. The person who attends worship only will give $400 a year. The person who's living all in, they will give $2,300 a year on the average. And that increases along the path. So the all-in number is our only measurement of success. That's how we define success.
And how many people at Eastside are kind of in that category? They're living out those 4 traits that you're looking for.
Yeah. So we just did a purge because of COVID. We held on to people. We was at 312. We did the month of August was, like, hey, no, Todd, really, are you in or not in life group? Because as soon as you drop out of one, you drop out of all in.
Yeah.
So if you're not serving, if you just drop out of one of those four environments, then you're no longer all in. And so we're at 292 today.
Okay.
Because of that purge.
It'd be interesting also to do some research as worship attendance compared to that all-in number. Like as that all-in number grows, is worship attendance also growing? You all probably have tracked some of that as well. Virgil, you're a reader. Name a couple of books that have had a great impact on you as a Christian or as a Christian leader.
Yeah. So as a leader, two books. I mean, there's many. I've got a library full of books, and I've read most of them. But Necessary Endings by Henry Cloud helped me to understand that it's okay to release people, and to, even from volunteerism, it's okay to do that. And that sometimes a necessary ending is necessary, and even with staff, because I believe that I can bring out the best in people. And so I had to overcome that. And then the other one by Henry Cloud that was really helpful was Boundaries.
Yeah.
And I'm still trying to implement boundaries in my life. And I have to have help because I never want to say no. I always want to say yes, which leads to a very busy schedule.
Yeah, and it's not good for anybody. I mean, you're not going to give your best if you're saying yes to everything. So, and I don't apply this like I should, but I did hear in some book that somebody said, just remember, every time you say yes to one thing, you're saying no to something else. You might be saying no to time with your wife, time with your children. You might be saying no to your personal development, exercise time, but we all have limited count, time, space. And so a yes equals a no. And we have to think about what we're saying no to. Hey, Virgil, I'm reading a book, Carey Nieuwhof. It's called I Didn't See It Coming.
Yeah.
And it's seven areas of struggle for leaders. And he's a great writer. And I'm finding that very, very helpful.
Yeah, Carey's a friend. He's a good guy.
What are some indicators for you that you need to pull away from ministry activity and invest either more in your family or care better for yourself? What are some indicators that you're not ministering from a healthy place?
I'm agitated. I'm not patient. And I'm internally distracted.
Yeah.
And when those things are at the all-time high, when those things are going on, I know that I'm out of balance.
Describe internally distracted. What do you mean by that?
Well, so is that I'm always thinking, I'm not listening to the other person. I'm thinking about what I got to get started, what I have to move, all the things I have to do, this conversation, this to-do list, all of that. Even sometimes, like when I drive from home to work or to the church, I don't even remember the drive because I'm internally distracted. Guilty. And that is a key indicator that I'm living in dysfunction.
Well, so I gave you a copy of the book, Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. And in that book, he shares some startling statistics. One being that our attention span is less than that of a goldfish.
Yes.
That we can't stay focused on anything for, I think, more than 7 seconds. And but the second one is that almost all of us are living in a constant place of partial disengagement. We're partially disengaged almost all the time. And that's what you're describing. Your best advice for a leader or pastor just getting started in any ministry position, what would you say to them?
The best advice that I would give to any person who started out.
I would think you'd tell them to keep growing. I mean, just listening to you and knowing some of your story about pursuing coaching and a lifetime learner, I think that would be something high on your list.
Well, I think here's what I ask my young leaders. They tell me they want to be leaders. And I ask the question, how many books on leadership have you read? Mm-hmm. And the answer is always the same. Zero. If you're going to be a leader, all leaders are readers. And not all readers are leaders, but all leaders are readers. And I would say, if you're going to be a leader, then you have to be a reader.
John Maxwell popularized that quote. I think it first came from President Harry Truman. Not all readers are leaders, but all leaders are readers. Virgil, what do you hope to see? What do you hope to accomplish before the Lord calls you home? Anything on your mind that you?
Yeah, we have a bold vision of 10,000 people, 7 campuses.
Wow.
And our objective is to have a campus. We want to take back Madison County and Interstate 75, as we know that is a drug highway corridor from Miami to Detroit, Detroit to Miami. And we'd love to have a campus at exit 99, 95, 90, 87, 83, 77, and take that part back for Jesus.
You want to make it hard to go to hell from Madison County.
Yep.
I love that. Well, Virgil, thank you, man. Thanks for your friendship. Thank you for your ministry in Kentucky, your work at Eastside, and thank you for joining Leadership Lessons.
Thanks for having me. I've enjoyed it, Todd.
If we could pray, let's pray. We'll pray for you, but we also want to pray for other pastors and leaders. Let's pray together. Father God, thank you for Virgil. Thank you for how you've wired him, dear Lord. You're shaping him according to your plan and purpose. Thank you for his own investment. We know even that desire is a work of your Spirit. We do pray your blessings. Lord, I pray this bold vision would come about. I do pray for those 7 campuses, dear Lord, 10,000 people, that you would multiply him and use him for your purposes until, Lord Jesus, you return or call him home. We pray together for Kentucky Baptist pastors, church staff members, AMSs, Christian ministry leaders in all walks of life, that you would strengthen us for the work that you've given us to do, that we'd find success in how you measure it for our life, not in how someone else, that we wouldn't compare ourselves to others, that we'd be growing leaders, but mostly that we're growing in the fruit of the Spirit. And we pray this together in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you, Virgil.
Thank you.
You just heard from Pastor Virgil Grant on Leadership Lessons. Next week, Dr. Tim Searcy will be joining us, and I hope you can join as well.